Okay, today I am going to make a few notes about workflow, just to sort of cement in my own mind some of the things that I've been learning and, you know, pass it on. Okay, so there was an issue that came up the other day that basically amounted to this. Let's say I'm creating an animation, and the problem I'm going to run into is that I'm theoretically I want to keep my animation on as few levels as possible, preferably just one. And so I sort of came up with this idea that we could simply delete the palette entry after we do inking, in order to get rid of the quote-unquote pencil lines. Okay? So I'm just drawing this character so we have something to work with, okay? Oops, didn't want that line in there. Okay, so yeah, this is just a quick anime style character. And, okay, so there he is. Now, the problem is that OpenToonz does not allow you to delete palette entries 0 or 1. The numbering of the palette entries is 0 indexed, meaning it starts at 0, not 1. So that's a little confusing, especially because there's shortcut keys on. You can use shortcut keys to jump between palette entries. So the third one is actually number 2, and the second one is number 1, etc., etc. So it's a little confusing. But in any case, my idea was that you could do your inking right over top in the same level. And by the way, I want to say, it's not like it's critical that it all be in the same level. As we progress here, I'll show you why it actually doesn't matter as much as I kind of was thinking it does. But just going to go through and look at what some of the points are. Okay, so number 1, I want to say that I'm generally going for an anime aesthetic with the work I'm currently doing. And with that in mind, these settings on the Toonz raster level basic brush seem to be pretty good. The size ranges from 3 to 8, hardness of 10, smoothness of 10, and the draw order normally would be overall. We'll kind of come back to that, but okay, so basically what I've found is this gives a look or an aesthetic that is pretty consistent with what you seem to see in most anime. It's got a little bit of that scanned pencil art look, and it does help also to raise the shading up to kind of a charcoal instead of black. Okay, so let me just keep going here and get my character drawn, and then we'll deal with some of these other ideas. Okay, first problem you run into is that if I want to go ahead and do some coloring, I'm going to hit the fill tool, and you can see what happens. So the idea would be to get rid of these pencil lines. It doesn't do any good to turn the alpha down all the way, because it's still, as far as OpenToonz is concerned, those lines are still actually there, even though they're invisible. Okay. So therefore, I want to I want to give a shout out to Darren T, because this guy, Darren T, who you need to subscribe to if you're not subscribed all over or already, he always seems to come up with a solution when I get in a pickle. And the solution he came up with was, if you get in this situation where you weren't thinking and you did your initial lines with palette entry 1, which is the default, then just use your eraser. And I'm going to show you another tip here, by the way, that I didn't know until recently, is if you hit the Alt key, the eraser dynamically sizes. So that's just something to be aware of. But the idea is that here you would hit selective. And by hitting selective, you can erase and get rid of just the pencil lines. Cool. Well, one wonders, is there maybe an even better way? And I think I found a better way, which is to do it this way. Hit the fill tool, and we're not going to fill areas, we're going to fill lines. Okay? And then just generally, if this was a whole sequence of pencil test, then first of all, you can just select your whole frame, and you have effectively moved these lines to this palette entry by just coloring them. Okay. And even better, if you had a sequence of drawings, let's just do it this way. I'm just going to do this, make this really simple. So I'm hitting the D key so I can just essentially modify my art. Okay, so I have 3 different drawings. So let's say you're in a hurry and you do your pencil test, and then you realize, oh man, I used palette entry number 1, the default. Now obviously these lines are actually in this palette entry. That's irrelevant for the sake of what I'm about to show you. But if we wanted to switch all these back to this color, we could do it this way. Hit the fill tool again. We're going to color the lines, but we're going to select frame range. So now you just select your entire frame, then you go to your last one, select the entire frame, and then OpenToonz actually colors all of the frames. So in one step, this was kind of the dilemma I had the other day, is how the heck do we move our lines, actually move them from one palette entry to the other? This is how you do it. Okay, now having said all this, another thing that I've found is it's definitely useful to have a basic palette that you always use just from the start, which for me looks like it seems to be this one. Okay, well, what does this do for you? Well, first of all, I can delete all these, and I'm going to delete the styles only. And as you can see, my guy turned red because now OpenToonz doesn't know what color he's supposed to be because his palette entries were removed. But what I'm getting at here is that if your basic palette when you start is this default, probably the smartest move would be to just always drag this other palette in immediately and switch to it. Because as you can see from the index numbers here, these numbers are all higher. In other words, OpenToonz is going to count these. It's also counting the ones that I deleted actually, but that doesn't matter. The point is that these palette entries can be deleted pretty quick and easy. Okay, and by doing it that way, I've naturally created a situation where I can do what I was talking about doing, where later on I can just delete all this stuff, and what's left is what I wanted. Now, let's go ahead and, just for the sake of simplicity, let's erase these, and let's just say we now wanted to send all these lines over to this color. Okay, so I just do it the same way. Whoops. If you make a mistake, OpenToonz is acting a little funny. Select. Oh, I see. I need to do it in the X sheet. I was selecting the drawing, not the X sheet cell. Okay, so now OpenToonz has moved all of these lines over to this palette entry, and I can edit them as desired. Now, another question I wanted to bring up and talk about a little bit is the question of shadows, because it's kind of a big deal. It comes up a lot with anime. The traditional, I've really played around with this, and this is kind of what my conclusion is. The traditional way you see, if you kind of look on YouTube for this sort of stuff, that shadows and highlights and things like that are dealt with is something like this. You would have an alternate color, and by the way, if you're going to do it this way, I would suggest putting under all, because what that does is it makes it so that your shadow lines that you're creating actually pass underneath. As you can see, they pass underneath the existing drawn lines, and what this gives you the ability to do is do something like that. Okay, now this is kind of cool and useful. Let's just make a new color here for a flesh tone, and then I'm going to copy that and make a little darker one for my shadows. So now I'm in fill mode. I don't want to be in frame range mode right now, and what I'm going to be painting is areas. Okay, so now because this has the setting auto paint for lines, these lines are going to disappear when I paint it. And from what I've been able to discern, it's also important that the fill tool, that this checkbox is checked. If it's not, I believe this will fail. Yes, you see it didn't erase the lines. If I turn auto paint lines on, boom, the lines get erased, and there's my shadow area. Now the nice thing about this is I can tweak the tonality after the fact. Having said that, what I'm finding is you really want those shadows to be on a separate level, actually. Here's why. Putting in all these lines and then painting them is a little bit clunky. Whereas if I go over here and just, let's hit the B key and draw, and then what I'm going to do is hit the P key for the paintbrush, and I'm going to kick up the size a little bit. Okay. Actually, let me change my mind about that. Okay. By doing shadows this way, you have a little more control. I would say it's a little more intuitive. It's probably faster. It's probably less error prone. And if you you go outside of the lines, and by the way, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to turn the alpha down. Okay, if you go outside of the lines or whatever, you can always just go in and clean it up real quick with the eraser. So the fact that you can sort of fly in and fix things, say like that, in my opinion, makes it a little more intuitive. So now the question you have is, well, what about later? You get this guy all colored in, you got him on more than one level, and now you have to work out your timing. Okay, well, the problem would be that actually, let's do it this way. Let's do the paintbrush here as well, and what I'm going to do is just put in a dot. Oh, sorry. Needs to be the B key in order to auto create a level, or in order to auto create a new cell or a drawing in the X sheet, you have to use the B key, the brush, but then just switch over to the P key, which is the paintbrush. By the way, I don't think that's the default. I've set it to the P key in my shortcuts, but I don't think that's the default. But anyway, the point here is that you're going, now just by using the up and down arrow, I can toggle between these. Now the problem you're going to have is, well, okay, now I've got these multiple frames that are all in sync, but it's basically just an animatic. It's just a series of drawings. What about when I'm ready to do my timing and editing? The problem that I have is if I stretch this guy out to, you know, be 24 frames long, all of a sudden, as you can see, the shadows are out of sync. What do you do? Well, here's what you do. I believe it's in X sheet, insert frame. Okay. Now I've assigned shortcut keys to this, which is Alt up arrow and Alt down arrow. But when you do an insert frame operation, it inserts frames all across the quote-unquote spreadsheet or the X sheet. And the same holds true if I hit delete frames. Okay, so now let's say you want to expand this animation with the animate tool. Let's just see how you would do this in a really simple way. What you'd probably do is set the center down here, kind of where his neck is. You know, we're sort of assuming the rest of the body's been drawn in there or whatever. And having set the center, we say, well, let's do a little rotation. Let's do a little rotation here. And let's move it on back. Well, okay. I'm going to ignore the fact that obviously the center is in the wrong place because of the changing of positions in the drawings. That actually brings up another point. If you're going to move your character around, you really want to kind of make a decision. Are you going to do it with multiple drawings, or are you going to do it with the animate tool? And now let's say I'm going to use the scaling tool, and I'm going to maintain mass, and if I hit the control key, then I get this effect going on. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put in a little squash and stretch as well. Okay, and obviously we're exaggerating a bit here. Alright. Okay, so the question then becomes, well, okay, now once again my shadows are out of sync. Well, the solution is simple. Go into your schematic, which I don't know if this is the default, but I have it mapped to the F3 key. So I hit F3, and if I take the shadow column and just connect it to the other column, now they're locked together. Problem solved. Okay, so now this is a pretty concise set of tools and techniques that gives you the ability to create fairly complex rigging situations and some nice animation with the animate tool. It's very quick, so it's everything about it's economical, and it's also effective. Keeps everything together. So my basic contention is that if I am going to use auto paint for lines, I'm generally going to use it for lines that I want to have disappear when I do my painting. Okay? A good example of that might be, let's hit the eraser here, and I'm just going to erase everything. We don't want selective turned on because we want it to erase whatever I try to erase. If I hit selective, it's only going to erase, as you can see, it's only going to erase the currently selected palette entry, which is a great capability. And by the way, another example of where this sort of thing is useful would be if I wanted to, let's say, have an alternative outline color. Okay, so I'm going to hit the P paintbrush, and I'm only going to color lines. And now if I want to go ahead and tint, you know, some of the outlines, which you do see in anime quite a lot, you can do that. But getting back to the other thing I was going to show is hit the eraser, and we're going to erase everything. Okay. Now, if I had a scenario where I for whatever reason, I decided I don't want this guy's mouth I don't want lines around it. Well, then that's where I would use auto paint for lines. Okay, and now I can fill that in, and the outlines disappeared, as you can see. But I'm not really using auto paint for lines for shadows per se, because it just gets a little clunky. Let me show you how it gets clunky. Alright, this is going to be white except slightly gray, and then this is going to be slightly darker. Okay, so what you might do is paint this, and now you paint that so you can get some shadowing on the eyes. And let's just keep going with this for a moment, and let's just say this guy's going to have blue eyes, and we'll put a shadow area in there too. So blue eyes, shadow area. Okay, and we'll make the shadow area a little darker. Okay, so for me this technique is kind of inferior actually. Alright, so I'm going to back up, and because you see a lot of little flaws in it and stuff, so let's just kind of go back a few steps. Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to, just to backtrack, I'm going to hit my eraser, and I'm only going to erase lines, and I'm going to choose selective. Boop! That lets me erase only the lines, only the color that I'm interested in. Now in this particular case, I do need to go back in and do a little tightening back up on my lines because of what I just did. But now I can fill that with my white color. Control C, Control V, and let's give him green eyes this time. Okay, now I can go back over here and just with my paintbrush and we don't want to be in lines mode, we want to be in areas mode, so we're painting areas. Okay. For me, that's a lot more controllable, much more controllable. And I can come back here and put that in, maybe put lines and areas, so I want to paint over everything there. Okay, and in point of fact, as you can see, I just discovered a bit of an issue. If I want to put a highlight on the eye, it really needs to be over the over everything. So I'm going to hit Control C, Control V, slam this back up to maximum, and there you go. Okay, and again, everything inherits as desired. So not super proud of this character that I drew. And of course you could go back in and fine-tune it later. But anyway, the sumupance of all this is that managing your palettes and knowing, because filling, basically really inking or drawing and filling and painting, if you want to think of the brush which is this, and the paintbrush is two different things. Painting, brushing, filling, these operations are very closely intertwined with the palette. And so a little bit of strategy seems to make a lot of sense. And so for me that means have a basic palette that you always start with. It just makes everything easier downstream. And then understand these different options with both the paintbrush tool, like the selective option. Know whether you plan to paint lines, areas, or both. Same with the eraser tool. Being able to choose lines or areas, use selective where necessary so that you only erase what you intend to erase. So here, if I say, well, this highlight is not particularly useful, don't really want that, okay, I can just delete only that, which is great. So I think that's it. Wow, 25 minutes. Holy cow. Didn't expect that to take that long. This stuff is all... I did this video because this is stuff you will bump into over and over and over again in your workflow. And so it's good to know the tools. And if you want to know what inspired it, I'm going to go back to this scene that I was working on. And because of poor decisions on my part, I've run into some issues. Like here we've got some shadowing stuff that I actually think I'm not going to use. But yeah, this level is kind of goofed up because of going through the process of trying to figure out how to move things around in the palette and solve the sort of problems I've outlined here. It's not a big deal. Because of what I now know, all the fixes are probably only going to take a few minutes. It's not a big deal at all. But it has been about a couple day learning experience to figure out how things work. And know my tools well enough that I can solve the problem at hand, whatever it might be. So anyway, with that, I will call it good for the moment. And